that's when we get to our third person in our lineage and in the history of Reiki. Mrs. Takata, Mrs. Hawayo Takata. She was born in Hawaii of parents who were immigrants from Japan, and she grew up working in the cane fields, and at a very young age, her husband died, leaving her to care for their 2 young children. With all that she had to do, being a single mother, 2 young children to care for, working in the cane fields day after day, she developed some serious maladies. She had several illnesses that she had going on within her. But she kept working. She had a nervous breakdown. She kept working. Her sister eventually died, and it was Hawayo's responsibility to travel back to Japan, where her parents had returned, to inform them of her sister's death. So Mrs. Takata and a sister-in-law traveled back to Japan, and she decided that while she was there, she could probably get some help in healing these physical issues that she was dealing with. So she first informed her parents of her sister's death, and then she checked herself into a hospital. In the hospital, they looked at her, they found out exactly what was going on, and they scheduled her for surgery. So she went ahead, she prepared herself for the surgery, and when she was on the operating table, she heard a voice saying, "This surgery is not necessary." And she heard this voice 2 times and wondered if there was maybe another option. And on the 3rd time, when she heard the voice saying this surgery is not necessary, she decided to get up, get dressed again, and ask to speak with the doctor. When she spoke with the doctor, she asked him if there were any other options that she might look at to be healed of these issues. And he told her about Dr. Hayashi's Reiki clinic. So she went to the Reiki clinic, and she began working with individuals there. And she worked for a few months and was able to be healed of her issues. She was completely healed of all of the physical stuff that was going on for her. It was funny because when she first started going in for treatments, she felt such great heat. She thought the practitioners must be using something. They had some tool or something that they had, but she couldn't see anything. And so one day when the person was reaching out to direct the energy, to channel it to her, she grabbed their arm and searched up in their loose kimono in the sleeve, because she felt that there had to be something hidden in there. And the person, of course, reacted with shock and asked what she was doing. And when she told him, he just bust out laughing. And he explained to her the energy and what it was and what was going on. And she was just amazed. So she continued with her treatments, and she was healed. As she went through this, she was so impressed, she decided that she needed to know how to do this as well. So she started talking with Dr. Hayashi and trying to convince him that she needed to be attuned to the Reiki energy as well. Now at that time, Reiki had not left Japan, and people felt that it needed to stay in Japan and it needed to stay with males. Dr. Hayashi had attuned his wife to Reiki, but no other females. And after Mrs. Takata worked with him and talked with him over and over again, he decided that yes, this was a good idea, that he could attune another female and that he could take Reiki beyond the boundaries of Japan, so that this energy could begin to spread out to others. So Mrs. Takata stayed there, and she went through the first 2 attunements with Dr. Hayashi in Japan. After a couple of years, however, she returned to Hawaii and continued with her life. Eventually, Dr. Hayashi went to Hawaii, and there he attuned Mrs. Takata to the level of master, of Reiki master. Now, when he got there, he asked her what she had to offer, how much she could afford to pay him for this attunement. And Mrs. Takata's response was she had nothing. She was a very poor woman. The only thing she had was her home, and it was valued at $10,000. So Dr. Hayashi said, okay, I'll take it. And so we get what many people still look at as the $10,000 Reiki attunement, and some people still require that fee for a Reiki attunement because Mrs. Takata gave her home in exchange for this attunement, for the master attunement. And when Dr. Hayashi took the home, that meant that Mrs. Takata got to nail up a sign up front saying that this was now a Reiki clinic, and she continued to live in her home. She was not left homeless after this, but she gave her home up to become a Reiki clinic so that she could continue the work of Reiki. So Mrs. Takata, during her lifetime, attuned a total of 22 masters. Oftentimes we'll hear that she attuned only 21. Her daughter is often left off the list. However, in her own list, she has 22 masters listed. And you'll see those again in your manual. You'll see a listing of the different individuals that Mrs. Takata attuned to Reiki Mastership. Now, 3 of those individuals are underlined. That's because when they were attuned with one of the symbols, they were taught a little bit different way to use that particular symbol. Virginia Somdahl is someone who was taught to use one of the symbols a little bit differently. And that is actually the way that we are taught because Mrs. Somdahl is in our lineage. So if you continue on to Reiki 2, you will be taught a unique way to use one of the symbols, one of the Reiki symbols, and we'll use it to channel information, to connect with spirit and to get information from guides, from angels, from spirit, to be able to get messages and channel those to help a person gain some information and insight that they need. So using that symbol allows us to channel that information through Reiki, which means, again, because it's through Reiki, it's always high and healing and for the person's greatest good. So it's a very comforting, very loving, and very profound way to receive information from spirit. You'll also notice numbers 1 and 2. Those are the first 2 people who Mrs. Takata attuned to mastership. Her first person that she attuned to mastership was Virginia Somdahl, who is within our lineage. Another person who studied with Mrs. Takata is Larry Rosencrantz. He studied first and second degree Reiki with Mrs. Takata, but she transitioned before he was able to go through full mastership. So he went through Virginia Somdahl to receive his mastership attunement. So within the lineage that you will be attuned through, you have Dr. Yusui, Dr. Hayashi, Mrs. Takata, Virginia Somdahl, Larry Rosencrantz, and then Jonathan and I. So that will be your Reiki lineage. Jonathan and I actually began studying Reiki with a different Reiki master. However, we completed our studies and went through the master attunement with Larry Rosencrantz. It's fun to talk with Larry about Mrs. Takata because she's really the one who brought Reiki to the West and helped to spread it out so that we have it here today. And he talks about her and her personality and how she was just a little spitfire, and it really fits with what you can see when you read the story of Mrs. Takata and her insistence on being taught how to use this energy, and with all that she did within her life to further the spreading of the Reiki energy so that we can have it today for ourselves as well.